representative who's going to be speaking is Fernando Molina. He currently serves as the Public Information Officer for Tucson Water. He has also served as Water Conservation Manager for Tucson Water and worked with the Arizona Department of Water Resources before that. Also speaking today will be Wally Wilson. Wally Wilson has 25 years of experience in water remedial and resource investigation in a half-dozen states in the western U.S. He received a BS in geology from Sul Ross State University in Alpine, Texas. Mr. Wilson is currently the Chief Hydrologist leading the Water Resources Management section for Tucson Water. This utility section is responsible for managing the city's water portfolio of CAP water, recycled water, and groundwater. Wally and his section of hydrologists are also responsible for the feasibility investigation, permitting, design, and operations optimization of Tucson Water's 6 recharge facilities. So what we generally do, and if you've been here for brown bags in the past, we generally go around the room, do a quick self-introduction so that Fernando and Wally who know who they're speaking to. So I'm Jean McLean, Associate Director of the Water Resources Research Center. And those are our 2 speakers. And
my name is Nathan Lehman. I work for Bureau of Reclamation.
Keith Alper, I'm also with Bureau of Reclamation. I'm Suzanne Lee, I'm here at the Water Resources Center. Dr. Markley, here at the Research Center. Sharon Mitchell, Water Resources Center.
Shanna Wiggles, I'm a citizen of Oil Valley.
Mark Crosswagon, Soil Water Environmental Science. Correlated Steering, Department of Chemistry. Joanne Staley from Southern California.
Wonderful.
Vincent Pulowski, graduate student, School of Geography and Development. Chuck Freitas, and I'm with Tucson Regional Water Council. Mike Block with Natural Water District. Placido de Santos, citizen.
Michael Garcia, retired professor of science.
I'm at the Water Resources Research Center.
That's kind of the volunteers off and as a student.
I'm Lynn Fisher from TLLP Worldwide Group.
I'm Don Fisher from TLLP Worldwide Solutions. We represent a company that does water purification and we're interested in perhaps helping out in reclaiming some of our water.
Wonderful. Well, with that, please help me in welcoming Wally. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you all for being here today. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be asked to come and speak at the brown bag presentations here. I'm going to cover some of the general information for our presentation today. Wally will follow up with me in some of the technical aspects of what we'll be talking with you about today. For those of you that are familiar with our presentations, we almost always start with this slide. We have been positioning ourselves and branding ourselves as not just Tucson Water, but we provide water reliability. And we do that for a couple of different reasons. Number one, as I've been going out into the community and talking to people, there's a couple of things they don't realize. They don't realize that we're not just providing your water today and that you get the bill next week and you send us the bill. They're not realizing that we plan into the future. We're looking 50 years out in terms of water supply. And by the way, these 5 icons that you see here are what we believe represent water reliability as we operate as a utility. So water supply represented by a small water drop morphing into a water drop represents that vision to the future, knowing that we need to make sure that we have water into the future, and we assume that there's going to be some growth, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. The next icon that we have here is a little water drop under a magnifier, and that obviously represents water quality. We have to make sure that the water supplies that we develop are matched to the quality that we need. So for example, we'll talk a little bit about our use of reclaimed water or reusing water in the community. That's a water supply that we've developed. It doesn't have to be drinking water quality, and it's reflected in the processes that we have and the delivery system that we have so that it matches the use. Same thing as we go look to the future and we have to develop new drinking water supplies. It's just imperative that those water supplies meet the water quality standards for drinking water that the federal government has established. I'm going to skip the middle one for now. I'm going to go to operations and systems And that wrench represents our infrastructure. Basically, that's what it's about. So we're developing a water supply. We're making sure that it's of adequate quality. It does not do us any good if we can't distribute that water to our customers. So that's another integral part of water reliability, making sure that the water is there at your home or your business when you need it. This is also probably when you look into the future and you look at the costs for a lot of what we do. A lot of it's going to be focused on replacing or repairing aging infrastructure. I know you've all probably heard that term before. That's a big part, that's a big challenge that we'll have moving forward into the future. The last icon to the right here is a larger water drop morphing into a smaller water drop. This represents efficiency. And when we talk about efficiency, we're talking about it in two different ways. Number one, it represents the demand management programs that we've been really successful at for many, many years. Conservation has been and always will be an important part of Tucson Water and the community. I mean, there's just a lot of support for that. We tend to think of it more and talk about it more in terms of efficiency. 30-some years ago when we had to start our water conservation programming efforts here, it was more about telling people not to use water. You need to conserve the water. It had nothing to do with the resource. It had more to do with infrastructure and the inability to move the water, to pump enough water out of the ground and get it to our customers. Today, we think you'll see, we think we've done a good job. What we're focusing more on is the efficient use of the water resources. The second manner in which efficiency is represented in there is how we as a utility operate now. We are, like almost everybody living in this community, are learning to do more with less. We have fewer employees than we had many years ago, but we have many more services than we had many years ago. So efficiency is how we operate. I'm going to zoom in on the last one here, the water customers, because for me, in all the years I've been talking to people about water conservation, at the end of my presentation, because I was a conservation manager for a long time, at the end of my presentation, the questions were about everything else, supply, quality, distribution. And what I've learned is people want to learn about all these different elements. It's not just the water conservation part. When we talk about water reliability, there's certainly the element of customer service, making sure that, because we do this all for our customers, there's that element that's really important. But when we talk about water reliability, what it allows us to do is talk about the investments that we're making. And the reason that focuses in on the customers is those investments that we make, whether it's a new technology to help us operate more effectively and more efficiently, whether it's, for example, right now we have one of our capital programs is improving or rehabilitating our reservoir system, developing a new water supply, building a new water treatment facility. All that requires an investment, and that's reflected with our customers through rates. And I think that we've been very effective in getting this information out and people understanding why their rates change, and they will be going up. So water reliability is what we're about. Everything, I've had people comment to me that the icons connected like puzzle pieces is kind of corny, but I have to tell you that I think that's an accurate depiction, because a decision that we make about water supply is certainly going to have an impact on the conservation on the efficiency side or the water quality side. All these things are connected. You can't make decisions independent from all these other factors in there. So water reliability means long-term planning and appropriate infrastructure and program investment. I already talked about that a little bit in the sense that this is what drives the rates. So we want to make sure that people understand what our vision is 50 years out. A lot of people are surprised that we're doing planning that far in advance. We have to, and you'll find out a little bit more later about why we do that. And as I said, all that requires investment in order to make sure that reliability is there. One of our key elements of our long-range water plan is maximizing the use of all renewable water resources. Now here's the question that I know if I ask in almost any other group, how many of you know what a renewable water supply is? We're finding out a lot of people don't. And so I have to now take an extra bit of time to explain this concept, this idea of renewable water supplies. And the way that I'm doing it, because we Googled this, we went online, Wally and I looked around, couldn't find any kind of definition that really made a lot of sense to the layperson. The way we are explaining renewable water supplies is that it is a water supply, it's active in the water cycle, it's a supply that's replenished in a human time scale. So that's kind of the critical part of this definition. So river waters coming, surface waters, rivers and lakes, renewable water supplies are replenished in a human timescale. Groundwater is not considered to be a renewable water supply here in Arizona because we're just never realistically going to replenish the aquifer and have it to the conditions that it was 40, 50, 60, 100 years ago. Not in our lifetimes. It's not going to be in a human timescale. So this is a critical part of what we're doing in terms of our long-range water planning is focusing on renewable water resources. The part that I'm mostly involved in and my work group is clear and timely communication about our water, how to use it and reuse it efficiently. So communicating is a big part of what we're doing today. We're going out into the community and offering this presentation in a little simpler version of it, less technical version. We brought you our technical version for this group because we figured you probably know a little bit more about water, which is good. But we're talking to our customers about this, and it's a two-way discussion. We want to tell you what we know, what direction we're going in, why we're making those decisions, but we also want input from you all, too. And I think we might have a questionnaire. Will that happen? Okay. Before we leave today, we'll have a questionnaire here for you to... We could turn it into a test. I don't know. But we do want some input from you, and any input that you can provide us would be really appreciated. So we're going to start by taking a historical look at water use here in Tucson, here in the valley here. Starts at 1940 along the bottom axis. This is the data to 2013. We haven't really updated. The 2014 data hasn't been finalized yet, but it doesn't change the picture a whole lot. So as you look at this graph here, the blue represents our groundwater use. The green, that's non-renewable groundwater. The green represents renewable Central Arizona project, or call it our river water. The purple band across the top here represents another renewable water supply, and that's reclaimed water. So this is what we're looking at here. Anybody tell me what that little sliver of green in there is? Oops. Oops. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That was our first attempt of using CAP water. It's amazing how many, I can go to a Rotary group or different kinds of community groups. A lot of people don't know what that is. That was our first attempt to utilize CAP water through a conventional water treatment system. It didn't work. It was a big oops on our part. We went back, did our homework, and came up with a different plan to use our CAP water. And that's, you can see, starting about 2001, we began to use that. Today, about 85–90% of our water that we use in our community is renewable supply. That's really good, renewable CAP water. The purple band here kind of would, if we did not have that renewable supply, if we had not developed it and didn't have it available, that would represent potable water that we would be using out there to irrigate. Most of you probably are aware that the reclaimed water system that we operate here is primarily users are just irrigation. So we've got golf courses, parks, schools. We have some neighborhoods, medians along roadways. That's where we're using that water. But I think if you look at this graph here, there's this tiny little color that you see here, that kind of lighter shade of green is TARP. That's remediation water coming out of the TCE cleanup facility at Irvington and I-19. So we have a Superfund site that extends from Raytheon to the south north to about Irvington and I-19. That represents the water that's being pumped out of the ground as part of the cleanup. It gets cleaned up and gets put into the distribution system as part of our drinking water supply. I think the story, couple of good points in the story that we like to tell using this graph is, number one, if you look at total potable water use in 2013 was the same as it was in 1989. And I think the big impact there is another number that doesn't show up on there is population. We're serving a little over 200,000 more customers today than we were here, but we're using the same amount of water. I attended a conference a few weeks ago. The theme of the conference was living with less water, and I had to point this out to people. We are living with less water. That's the efficiency icon that we talked about earlier at the beginning of the presentation. I think another good part of the story to tell here is this bottom line across the bottom here. We're pumping groundwater use today. The amount of groundwater that we're pumping is the same as it was pumped in 1944. So you can see that goes a long ways towards kind of taking the pressure off of our non-renewable supplies by emphasizing our use of renewable water supplies. We think that's a very good picture. We got a lot of requests for this graph. I know several people from the center here have asked us for this. So we just think that really shows a lot of the good work that we've done, even though we had a little oops inside of there. So that was a kind of historical perspective looking at water use in the community. This graph is taken from our update to the long-range plan. So we have this long-range plan that was established in 2000, is that correct? Goes to 2000 to 2050. About every 4 or 5 years, we do an update to that plan. We go back and we review the assumptions that were made, the assumptions that were used in making some of the calculations, the projections. And so this is kind of a revised version of the graph that you'll see inside there. So what are we looking at here? Well, this big block in here represents our CAP allocation. You can see that kind of tops off there at a little over 144,000 acre feet. When we look at the demand line, because this line here represents demand, there's actually three elements to the graph here. This portion of the demand curve represents actual demand, so it gives you an idea of the downward trend that we've been seeing. This little segment of the graph that you see here represents our projected demands in our 5-year financial plan. So every year, we go through this process where we look at what our budget will be for the next upcoming year. So it's a rolling 5-year plan. These are the estimates for demand that we have based on the historical demand that we're seeing. We've been doing a pretty good job working with our consultants and our staff in projecting what those demands will be. This big increase here is just really, those are the projections that come out of the long-range plan. This is where, Wally and his group kind of look at those assumptions that were used. Well, the assumptions changed a lot, but we're still looking at a target GPCD. This slope represents 127 GPCD. That's our current GPCD. Nope, it's a little bit lower now, I think.
124.
124. So those numbers are the 2014. They're not officially released yet, but that's what we're going to be seeing. Well, basically, if you look at this graph, the blue represents our actual usage of CAP water. The gray area that you see here represents the storage. That's the amount of CAP water that we're leaving in the ground. So we're taking today our full allocation, 144,000 plus acre feet, putting it into the ground in the Abra Valley. And then we're only using a little bit less than 100,000 acre feet per year. So that means we're getting a little bit more than 44,000 acre feet staying in the ground in the aquifer in the Abra Valley. So as we look forward to the future, if we can continue to operate under that schedule, you can see that our CAP allocation, based on these planning assumptions, I don't know if this graph has no, it doesn't. Somewhere around, 2040, we begin to see that the CAP allocation no longer becomes enough to sustain the population growth. And that's where, a lot of people don't like the term that we use there, deficit. But we don't know what else to call it. It's a shortage, it's a deficit. And actually what this graph also depicts on here, if you notice here, a little decline in the total allocation. That represents shortage of deliveries due to drought. So we know that we're in drought. I mean, there's no doubt about that. We know that a shortage will be called on the river. I think the big question is when. 2017, I think 60% chance is the last I've heard. So there's a good chance that within the next couple of years, a shortage will be declared on the Colorado River. A lot of people from reading media accounts and listening to the news know that Arizona gets the first cut, but that doesn't mean that municipalities get cut or get this deficit. There is within the state of Arizona a hierarchy of water rights, and the first people to take cuts, the first class of users would be agriculture and folks not holding a firm contract for that water. So people that have been buying extra water as it's been available, they lose that. Agriculture loses their cut as well. What we don't know is if in 2017 a shortage is declared, when does this occur? So there's some uncertainty as to when the shortage will be declared and when it will impact the municipalities. The municipalities and the tribes have the highest water rights, so we would be the last ones under the existing system to take those cuts. So that's why when we look to the future, Well, do we have a deficit? You know, on paper we do, but if you begin to look at, you know, if you look at the area of this portion of the graph here and compare it to here, we've been storing enough water in the ground, assuming that everything's going the way it is today. We'll have the water here, so the shortage won't really affect us like it might other communities. We're reading a lot about communities in California and Texas, Oklahoma, you know, basically the whole Southwest that's really been impacted by drought. Their predictions don't look as good as this. We're actually doing really well. But does this mean, because we're okay, assuming that everything operates the way this graph indicates, does this mean that we're sitting fine and we don't have to worry about anything? No. We plan for the long term. So we need to start looking at what will our next source of water be. And that's what we're,
Question,
yes.
Fernando, about that last slide. Just for those of us who've been following the updates, you know, that deficit, whatever you want to call it, whatever.
Shortage, deficit. People don't like that term, but
whatever, it's getting pushed out. And it's almost getting pushed out as far as 2050. One could ask 10 years or more after you release the first 2050 plan, when are you going to propose extending the end date to 2060?
The year that shortage is declared, there will be an update. 16,
And you'll extend the
and
period.
17, and you know we'll have
that'll be the fourth year.
modeling will be better. There'll be a little bit better forecasting. Two things I'll add to this graph. I don't like deficit. I call it that's potable demand above our CAP allocation, but that doesn't fit on it. So because as Fernando said, we have long-term storage credits to fill that. We have Arizona Water Bank to fill that.
Yeah.
We have CAGRD to fill that. We have recycled water to fill that, and we have vast amounts of groundwater. 30 years worth of groundwater, we just did nothing with groundwater. But there's severe consequences for using the groundwater at that rate, so which we've experienced in one law and one environmental law, we shifted to renewable supply. Now, I'll talk about this little thingy right here. This, for projecting, we use population and GPCD. We got a feel for the GPCD. We let the federal government deal with population. And the reason there's this jog here is because the population with a certain GPCD would have been all the way up here. But we have real data that shows we're below that. So this is a very conservative, on worst case, jump in 5 years to get back on track with population. The census has been wrong every 10 years. Last time it was wrong by 30,000 people. So another aspect, and so what I'm trying to do is show that even if there's a worst case situation, we're still going to have sufficient supplies to get through 2050. This is 127. I think the next update is going to be 120, and it's probably going to go right out to there. But we might have a better idea of when deficit might be. The point where we put that is based on the 2012 Bureau report and the subsequent CAP recovery plan for water bank water. At that time, everything was looking like, you know, it's the late term for municipal reductions in CAP. So that's really what that's based on. Now we've thrown the error, the question mark on there because there's a lot more uncertainty in that than there was in 2012.
And literally, a lot of that uncertainty was made public, literally a few weeks after we released the update to the long-range plan. After doing all the work, we released this, and all of a sudden there's more information, and we're all going, oh, man. Does that answer your question?
Well, yes, sort of. I mean, I was really asking when you were going to go past 2050.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
So
the next
you think
update
the
we're going
next
to bump
update.
out.
Okay.
Is it going to be 2065 or whatever? We want to stay that 50-year projection. That's a comfortable rate. So it'll be 60 or 65 or 70 when we do the next one.
Yeah, you know, the other thing you said in your answer, which I think is just important that people do understand, I'm not saying it's great to come groundwater, but you do have a legal right to inspect groundwater that you got by law.
And
then you can pump. And that's a little bit different than the other deficits that are being discussed, particularly from the Bureau of Reclamation study, where you're looking at all sources and all demands, and showing a deficit. So I
Right.
think that's a really important clarification.
And that's a point that I make when I'm out speaking to the public on this, is that what appears to be a deficit is that we have the water in storage. Even if things change, the procedures change, we have some redundancy. So we do have water that we've stored. We do have our groundwater. I mean, there are many communities that would love to be in the position that we're at. They don't have any other alternatives. We do, and that's a good thing. So what we'll be spending the rest of this afternoon talking about is our recycled water program. I think not too long after we released the update to the long-range plan, we released the recycled water master plan. Both of those documents, by the way, are available on our website. So if you go to our homepage, if it's not linked, right on the homepage, go to
Water resources.
Water Resources, yeah.
And on the left-hand side.
And the recycled water master plan was something that, it was probably about a 2-year process to go through this and review our recycled water issues that we have. And what this does is it breaks out recycled water into 2 elements. First part that the recycled water master plan looks at is the existing reclaimed water system. I mean, it looks at the physical infrastructure, what the needs are off of that, projecting into the future, what sorts of investments do we need to make to improve the system, the reliability of that system. It looked at what can we anticipate in terms of customers and usage on there. The second part of the recycled water master plan looks at this issue of using our recycled water entitlement through some sort of indirect potable reuse method. So basically this is saying we're going to look at taking the sewage that comes and the effluent that gets produced out of Pima County's wastewater facility and incorporating that into part of our drinking water supply for the future. Going through this process, there were just a lot of reasons that we could really look at and point to and say this makes a lot of sense. Number one, as I keep pointing out, we do long-term planning. Just because we feel comfortable that we have water into 2050, perhaps even a little bit longer, it doesn't mean we sit down and not do anything. We have to start looking for this today so that we're ready into the future. We know that drought, we had a little bit of discussion on drought and what the impacts are. We know that there's a drought. We know that there will be a shortage on the river call. What we don't know is when, and we don't know how the chain of events will happen afterwards. But we need to be prepared for cutbacks in delivery of CAP water. The other thing that we've been looking at, that we looked at in this process, was the investments that have been made in water in the last 10 years or so. So if you look at Tucson Water, just to build the Clearwater facilities, and the Clearwater facilities are collectively those areas where we take water, recharge it into the ground. We did something really unique, well, for Arizona at least. We built extraction capabilities around those facilities. So not only do we have the ability to put water into the aquifer, but we have the ability to take it out and put it into our delivery system. That's something that not a lot of communities have really invested in. But we've got about $250 million in storage and recovery facilities that we've developed here, that our ratepayers have developed. Then we look at, this is the part of the presentation where I ask people, everybody knows when they look at their bill, their utility services statement, the biggest portion of the bill are the wastewater charges. And, there's no getting around that. They are. The good news is, and this is why, Pima County has made over $600 million in wastewater improvements to facilities that they have. So, I mean, there was a lot of money to put in one short period of time. However, the product that is coming out of those facilities, the effluent, is really, really clean. And that's good because that's the source water that we're talking about here. When we talk about converting our sewage stream into drinking water, that's the source water that Tucson Water would start with as we begin the process of purification. So definitely a good investment in there. It hit a lot of people hard in terms of the pocketbook, but good investment overall long-term into the community. The other ongoing investment that we have is the purchase of CAP water annually. We now, this current year, we have budgeted $25 million to purchase our CAP allocation, that 144,000 acre feet, and bring it into the basin. Next year, I think it's budgeted at $27 million. It's going to continue to go up. When we hit the point that there's a shortage declared and we start seeing cuts to agricultural users, the price will go up even steeper because we have fewer users on the system to cover those fixed costs. So the rates will go up even quicker than they would in a situation of shortage as opposed to just having the regular users on there. So that's another reason that we're really interested in terms of the investment. And really, if you look at this $25 million every year, right now the challenge that we have is we're only using about half of the effluent entitlement that we have. The other half we literally lose control over. We get some credits for some of the recharge that occurs. But in terms of the investment that's being made, we're losing a substantial portion of that when we just discharge it into the Santa Cruz River and lose control of it. The other reason we think it makes sense is taking this step really supports economic development. We've already spoken a little bit in here about the alternatives that we have in terms of water supply. But let me ask you this. When was the last time any of you read anything in the media that talked about drought and shortages on the river? And when did you ever read about Tucson and the good position that we're in? That never comes up. We want to make sure that from an economic development perspective, people are aware that we don't have the issues that other communities have. So we think that's a big positive as we go out into the community.
Conference a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, because I was nodding my head, yeah. And that's exactly.
I want to quote an expert or something.
Yeah. We've had in the past, in 2000, what year were we in? In 2014, actually Wally was with one of these. We had two reporters, one from the Wall Street Journal, one from an NPR affiliate in Minnesota. They came to Tucson to learn about water conservation and water management, and both of these reporters were really shocked, saying, who'd have thought that I'd have to come to a little town in the middle of the desert to learn about water conservation and water management, how to do it right. So we're doing it right, and people notice that.
Why didn't the Smithsonian visit you? They should have come by.
I haven't heard from them.
Okay,
You can invite them.
They wrote that nasty article about shortages.
Oh, that's right.
The Wall
So
Street
that's a
Journal,
lot of that.
I'll interject real quick. The Wall Street Journal was interested in this monumental agreement between the city of Phoenix and the city of Tucson. Right. We had to go. Fernando and I had
We
to
broadened
go,
the
let's
discussion.
get you the real picture, not just what the cities agree it's more important than water resources. So we came to that.
Plus,
The Tucson Water operates one of the best and most dense reclaimed water systems in the state, maybe the best. And is its investment reflected in any of those numbers?
no, that's not even invested or reflected in here.
Do you have any idea of how much that is altogether?
I don't.
Because
I had to look at it.
That's actually a good number to put in
that
there.
also should be reflected.
Mhm.
I believe it's under $50 million.
The whole system.
Yeah,
Like
there's only
that's
100
over
there's
30
only
years,
160 miles of pipeline.
160 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah, 165 or something like that.
And the reclaim facility and recharge facility at Seaweed Water,
Yeah,
pumping
I
stations.
think it's under $50 million total investment. But I'll find out and I'll
And we should put that in there. That's a good point.
But it's not, right now it's not providing potable.
Okay. So what exactly is recycled water? Well, it's taking treated wastewater. We get hung up on the language we use, the vocabulary, because it's sewage, it's effluent, it's treated wastewater. It's taking that water and using it for a beneficial use. And I think that's kind of the standard, is the beneficial use part. So you can see some examples of wastewater being put to beneficial use. We're doing a lot of irrigation, not a whole lot of industrial processing. There is some replenishing of groundwater basins going on. But what we're looking at is this last one, purifying it for drinking water. This is important. We've talked about the reclaimed water system. Last April was 30 years that the reclaimed water system has been in place. So we have 30 years of operating a reuse system. We have many, many years, and Wally provided me the dates, but it's close to 30 years, probably 25 years at least, of understanding what happens when you take an effluent quality water and recharge it into the aquifer. When you pump it back out, what's happened? What kind of changes have occurred? What kinds of cleansing processes have taken place? So we have a lot of experience at Tucson Water with this.
The majority of that knowledge is research from the University of Arizona.
Yeah.
All that soil aquifer treatment stuff, it was pioneered here at U of A, looking at our soil water recharge facility.
I think on that topic, we also have, 15 years now of soil aquifer treatment with CAP water, just taking CAP water, recharging it into the Apper Valley, and understanding what the soil aquifer treatment and what the natural treatment processes are, because that's an integral part of what we're proposing on doing here. So we do have a lot of experience working in those two areas. This graph, this chart shows you basically who's using reclaimed water here. Certainly golf courses, that's kind of our industry. I guess that's our industrial use here, is irrigation for golf courses. But in terms of industry, golf courses is probably the bigger ones. Industry in an economic development sense, that brings a lot of money into the community. But we have parks, we have some residential. I want to point out the conservation effluent pool, because we want to be very clear here. We will make sure that the water for the environment is still available. That's really key. In fact, it's part of an intergovernmental agreement, this conservation effluent pool. So all the jurisdictions in Tucson that contribute to the sewage flows here have a proportional amount of their effluent dedicated to the conservation effluent pool. Very little, if any, of this is being used today, is it?
Santa Cruz River.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that whatever happens at the Santa Cruz River.
No one's been permitted yet.
Nothing's been permitted yet. I think the big challenge is it's infrastructure. How do you build a pipeline to get it to where you want it to do what you want to do? I think that's probably been the biggest challenge in there. We just want to be very clear in all of this process. When we talk about recycling water, the water for the environment will remain available.
Fernando, just a suggestion there on that chart, because I was sitting in the back and off like 72,000, you might want to go around the whole number.
Yeah.
Oh, these engineers,
Yeah, I know. These people want me, because what it is that the 10,000, 7328 is the city's responsibility. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, 73,000.
That's
7330.
7,300, right? I can't, it's not 73,000, but on an annual basis, the effluent pool is 10,000.
Right, but we're not the sole.
We're not the only
So
contributor.
7,328, is that the number? I'm way back here.
Yeah. The problem also is, and I fixed it online, but we haven't fixed it here. It says total reuse of 24,426. That's not total reuse. It should be total entitlement. So out of 24,400, that's the distribution, and that's just the City of Tucson's entitlement, which is what we're talking about for local.
I just suggest putting up whole numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever I see that many significant digits, I wonder how many are truly significant.
Those are right out of the reports that we have to send to the water department. So we got to get down to the 100th of an acre foot in our reporting. So somebody just rolled the numbers right out.
Yeah, I didn't prepare this.
Me.
That's okay. I'm just telling you, you're sitting in the back of the room, it's a little hard.
Yeah.
No, I told you, this is a two-way communication. We want to hear what you have to say.
It's kind of my comeback to people saying, well, we don't even know how much water we have. Oh, I think the difference. We calculate it to the gallon.
And Fernando, in comparison to the reuse or allocation, whatever that figure is, 24,000, how much of the reclaimed water is recharged? How many credits per year by Tucson Water?
Well, there were years when it wasn't so good. Right now, we are recharging probably about twice as much than we will extract from the extraction wells we put into the reflex system. So with we have 3 new basins. The water quality change coming out of the Pima County's facilities is basically drinking water quality with a little bit of pathology that isn't necessary for treatment, would need to be treated. But the water quality has improved recharge, and we're recharging. We have a very, very strict micromanagement of the recharge facility going on right
Are you
now.
talking about the managed facility?
No, managed does whatever it does. It is recharging more. But
How many credits are accrued there?
well, if let's see, if 100 acre feet goes into the Santa Cruz River, that's Tucson's, and all of it recharges, 50% of that goes to the state. So we only get 50 acre feet of credit. The majority of our credits are not in the City of Tucson. They're in the town of Marana.
So we don't know what the number is. Right
Oh, well, we know exactly what number it is. I don't know what it is right now. About 40,000 in the lower Santa Cruz, but we're selling some of that to CAGR.
Because the volume has doubled from the 2014 volume doubled from 2013.
Yeah.
Due to the treatment.
Right.
So Fernando, I'm only interrupting because you are doing it here and you do have a more informed audience that you might just in general. But I actually think that pie chart could, because it doesn't include the storage that you're getting through long-term storage credit. So you don't have to go into it now, but I'm confused as to what that 24,000 number does mean, because there is an amount that you have available to you that is being recharged through the managed recharge credit, and you could almost have a slice of the pie that's future use or long-term storage or something. So I would just note that I think it's a little confusing because that's not on there.
We'll take a look at that.
But this is looking at 1 year snapshot, not really what has happened, but this is the way it broke out for 2013. But we could add, so I think not in the pie per se.
I think you want to simplify it.
Yeah.
Simplify and
We have
reflect.
It can't just be another chart
Right.
that says we actually have this much and some of it's being just going to the benefit of nature and some of it is going for long-term storage credit.
We have charts like that, and they're called the water chart.
The available slice of the pie is that you could have delivered in 2013?
No, there's no demand for it.
Okay.
We could be drinking that.
So if
Because
there
it doesn't
was
have a
demand, it
committed
could have
demand.
gone there, but because there wasn't demand, it was
So 45% of that 24,400 went to the Santa Cruz River off of that chart. The CEP and the available, 45% of our water, half our water is going into the Santa Cruz River.
And that's what you're suggesting be cleared up. Yeah,
That's
I get
what I'm
that.
saying, just a little confusing.
Okay.
Fernando,
Yes.
you still have to keep it simple enough.
Yes.
For rotary.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that actually would help because we're talking about extra water and not getting full credit. So I think those are good suggestions.
This is the technical talk now.
Okay. And I'll turn this is where I turn it over to Wally.
Okay.
When the
so-
graphs get more complicated, I go to Wally.
Yeah. So part of the plan was like, well, how much of this are we going to have available for reuse? You know, there's got to be some point where, you know, some volume where it's economical to invest in the infrastructure. And if you project out and can't really find the point where, you know, well, if it's only going to be 5,000 acre feet for the next 20 years, probably not going to be investing in a program because 5,000 acre feet is not enough. So part of the plan was let's find out what we think. And these are all projections. These are based on information from the Pima County Wastewater Department, Regional Reclamation Department. And so what you're looking at here is a high and a low range. The facility plan that was done for that Pima County did in 2005 had a projection. And in 2010, they trued it up, and it was about 10% less than what they had originally projected for 2010. So this is sort of the, and some other information, but that's sort of the high range if you took that information and didn't reduce it by 10%. This is the low range, 10%. Some of that's looking at our demands over time, projected demands, because if we don't produce, if the potable water isn't delivered, the sewage is not generated. So there's a couple of different things here. But I kind of look at this and say, you know what, for quite a while we're going to be hovering around about 10,000 acre feet. That could be available. This does not include the conservation effluent pool. If the conservation effluent pool were not to be used at all, which personally I think the river is using it, that could be 17,000 acre feet. So that's kind of what we're looking at out to 2030. A little bit on vocabulary. Reclaimed water is the water that was treated to quality necessary for turf irrigation. We're all real comfortable with purple pipes and reclaimed the term here in Arizona and in Tucson. Potable reuse is any time you reuse that water for a potable purpose. Reclaimed water is not recycled. We're classifying all our water as recycled. Reclaim is treated to the point where it's available for certain use. It's only used one more time. It's used consumptively in the reclaim system. It goes on to turf. True recycling is you do the potable reuse. So you establish an urban water cycle where there's a large portion of water that continues to go around and around and around in the system
from treatment to use to delivery. Direct potable reuse currently is illegal in the state of Arizona by rule, not statute. That is, you have your treatment plants where you purify the water and it goes right into a distribution main to potable customers. There isn't an environmental barrier involved in the process. Whereas indirect potable reuse, there's an environmental barrier there. Put it into a large reservoir. Well, we don't really have those. You put it into the aquifer. Majority of the United States, you put it in the river and it flows down there, and the city down the next one treats it, the standards, and drinks it. So those are indirect, usually because of the environmental barrier. There are communities now in Texas and other places in the United States that direct potable reuse was the only option, and they needed it yesterday. Big Springs, Texas, and that whole area around the Colorado River irrigation district, the Texas Colorado River, ran out of water. Their lake was empty. They had no groundwater, and they was like, okay, we got to be drinking it today. So they had to rush into a direct potable reuse. Reason we do planning is so we don't have to rush into any. We learned what suddenly adding a new resource to the potable supply. We've been there. We did it again. Well, we didn't do it, but we were the victim of it happening again with the TCE plume from the airport. So we know that real sudden changes like that with a lot of investment and a new supply of water doesn't really work very well in Tucson. But we have the time to plan. So we're not going to hit a wall and suddenly say, we should have built that plant 20 years ago. Well, you can't build one of these kind of purification plants in a year, or it takes 5 years of work to build them. So we're going to plan this out into the future. Is it safe to drink? Well, of course it is. Multiple barriers. It's being done all the time right now. And by the way, you're all drinking indirect potable reuse water in your potable water right now because the city of Las Vegas's highly treated wastewater goes into Lake Mead. And by the way, all of the cities and towns upstream from Lake Powell and all the ag land runoff and all that, well, you're all potable, indirect potable reuse customers, and everybody in this country for centuries has been so. But with multiple barriers, now what we're really talking about now is not just drinking water standard. We're talking about the emerging contaminants. It's not a standard, but it is well entrenched in the public's mind that this is a problem. And so we're going to have to go through a purification process. Multiple barriers, part of it that is the environmental barrier and the treatment, and we'll get into that. Multiple stages of treatment. Ensure that the purified recycled water is safe for our customers. There's conventional wastewater treatment, solid, other impurities. Soil aquifer treatment. Research done right here at U of A has been showing that 80 to 85% of all known emerging contaminants are removed by soil aquifer treatment. That really knocks that list of 1,000 chemicals down that you don't have to pay to treat. There's some that Mother Nature doesn't touch, and we have to treat those mechanically. There's reverse osmosis or nanofiltration. That is extremely efficient at removing dissolved materials and constituents. It's very expensive because the pressures involved require a great deal of electricity. Advanced treatment. We are using an ultraviolet hydrogen peroxide treatment system, an advanced oxidation plant, to take care of 1,4-dioxane that suddenly appeared in the TCE plume from the airport. That is one way that destroys some of these very pervasive compounds like carbamazepine, PFOA, PFOS. Those are water repellents and fire retardants that's in everybody's clothes, and they wind up into the wastewater stream. So we considered a great deal. When we put it all together in all the combinations, we had well over 60 combinations of treatments that were evaluated in this report, but we've narrowed that down to 3 basic alternatives. We want the multiple barriers.
we looked at, well, should we do pre-recharge treatment or post-recharge treatment? Well, what about soil aquifer treatment? We get a lot of bang for the buck there. Okay, well, you know, there's TDS issues. What about microfiltration or not ultra, it's micro and nano filtration instead of RO? Can we get the advantages with not as high a pressure system? Not as much. But then there's also RO followed by nano filtration. GACs, granular activated charcoal, UV, AOP, all these things, we evaluated them in their capabilities and in the combinations of them and the sequences of those different treatments. What are the ones that would reach our water quality goals to be further evaluated on cost? Excuse me. Well, if you do any membrane treatment, that's like RO, nanofiltration, you've got a brine management issue. You have a reject on all those membranes. It's very brine, very salty. All this stuff is being pulled out of the water. You wind up with either you evaporate it and you wind up with a solid material you have to handle, or in liquid form, we don't have an ocean to put it in. During all this, we had the National Water Research Institute overseeing the development of the plan. We had workshops that would come in, we'd present the draft plan, they would review it, and they would give their blessing or say, we'd like to see this change. Half of that staff of that was U of A professors, and others from California and other parts of Arizona. So we had a very good independent review body looking at this with the names in recycled water. Shane Snyder was the chair of the committee. So they were third party. They just looked at our plan and said, these are things changed. And we got a letter that says, this looks very wonderful. Keep going. So we have three basic alternatives. So alternative one, we have pre-recharge. So we're going to treat all of it before we recharge it. And after recovery, we have just disinfection. There's problems with that. Number two, we recharge first, and we take advantage of soil aquifer treatment, and then we apply a membrane and disinfection afterward. There's a lot of different combinations of these membranes, but they were evaluated, but this simplified it. Then we looked at soil aquifer treatment with recharge first, then nanofiltration, then UV-AOP. Can we get those last sets of compounds busted up and out of the potable supply and the purification process? And I hope you all know these emerging contaminants are in concentrations so low that there's absolutely no way at this point in time to do human toxicological. Research is going to be done, detection methods will go down, and so we expect probably some of these are going to wind up with an MCL, and they will be a standard. We have to be able to adapt to that in our flexible plan with the right treatment when we get there. And so here we go. Our recommendation at this point was we're taking denitrified water from Pima County. We recharge that water through soil aquifer treatment. We get a lot of advantages out of that, like we've seen in our Clearwater program. Total organic carbon goes down, but the total organic carbon in the wastewater stream today is really, really low. That $600 million is paying off in water quality that the county had to invest. And then we'll look at nanofiltration, because at this point in time, we're not going to reduce the total dissolved solid in the potable system as a result of the Clearwater program, our CAP use. But this is a place where we could come in, we get a treatment advantage, and we get a reduction in total dissolved solids, which could then blend down the entire, the aggregate of our recovered CAP and the recycled water. Then we go through a UV advanced oxidation. There's a couple of compounds that just will not be broken down very efficiently, and nano does not take them out. RO does, but nano doesn't. So the UV, the UV rotates the molecule, and then you hit it with hydrogen peroxide, and it busts the bonds. And so that compound gets broken up, no longer there. Then we go to the Hayden-Udall treatment plant, or a treatment plant of some kind, where it's introduced into our potable system through Clearwell. We've got some modifications to this that we're considering. Okay, in the plan, we're looking at taking, let's see, which one of these is a laser? Okay. Over here is the Iron Road and Roger Road, which no longer are named that. Agua Nueva and Tres Rios water reclamation facilities. We build this pipeline all the way around the mountains, and we do new recharge basins at CAVSARP, isolate that recharge with recovery wells, and we would treat the water post-recovery and get it into the potable system the same way our recovered CAP water is. So that is what's in the plan. Right now, we're looking at, well, we have all this recharge at the Sweetwater Recharge Facility. The water quality is so good coming out of Agua Nueva, maybe we can just use that straight out of the plant for our reclaim system, and the recharge facility becomes available to do an indirect potable reclaimed program up to about 12,000 acre feet. You know, this is 20 years away, so it's not like tomorrow. And that would say, whoa, pipeline coming all the way around here. We would have a purification treatment facility on this side of the mountains, and it would be introduced into the distribution system on this side of the mountain. Lot of capital and energy savings doing something like that. So that's as this implementation plan goes along. We're doing research right now. The U of A and the city are doing research on water quality and treatment processes. We're also looking at alternatives to where might it be a better place to do this than 27-mile pipeline out the Abra Valley. The objective was to utilize as much existing infrastructure as possible, and we have that massive recharge and recovery capabilities here. So that's kind of why that came about at the time. But we are modifying that. So here's the project, or the program timeline. My favorite part is this out here where it's 20XX. We don't know what that date is when we would construct an advanced treatment facility and start delivering the water in any different fashion, indirect or direct. We get so much treatment out of soil aquifer treatment, I don't believe that there is a vision at Tucson Water where we would go to direct potable reuse, because we get so much energy and treatment cost recovery out of just recharging it. When it's recharged, it's in a reservoir, and it can be pumped out and treated to meet demands. It doesn't have to be a constant base flow. So we have advantages over that. And you don't have to build as large a treatment facility as you would if you treated it before it's recharged. So we've got, continuous public outreach. We're here today doing this part right there. We're going to continue that throughout. Technical investigations. We're doing technical investigations. There's more to do. A lot of that will be involved with U of A research. Process selection and piloting. We're going to be moving towards a demonstration project. One of the things that people felt more comfortable about if we were to do indirect potable reuse is if they saw how it worked and they got to drink the water. These are things that were successful in California, and very successful. And they really had to turn things around because they tried potable reuse and it got shot down by the public and the politicians, because some of the politicians said, "You didn't tell me that was sewage water." They knew all along. So they had to come back from total failure and start from zero again, and they developed a great program that we are modeling portions of to make sure that we have the complete confidence, our customers have complete confidence in the utility to be able to do this right and deliver it in a reliable way. Funding sources, financial planning, demonstration project out here, permitting, 2 to 3 years, and then design and construction, 6 to 10 year lead time. 6 to 10 years before we would throw a switch and say, "You're drinking it now." Because just the magnitude of the investments, you can't do it all in a year. You can't. So we know we're going to have a long drawn-out period. We'll build segments of it that can incorporate into existing uses, and at such time we have it all ready to go, and it's time to turn the switch on the treatment plant. We're ready before we have to be in a sudden crisis, which we're not and don't expect to, because we're planning. Long-term planning and sound infrastructure investment is key to Tucson's future. This is the key to every city's future when it comes to water resources. CAP and M&I allocations are unlikely, our allocation is unlikely to be shorted in the short term, in the near term. The mid to late term, that's where that question mark with arrows is. We know that's an uncertainty, and that's why we plan for those uncertainties. The long-range plan accounts for, I just said that. See, I told you I'd get ahead of myself. But again, we're planning for that uncertainty. That's why we put that 10% reduction in M&I out where the general idea of when that might happen in 2012. I wanted to make sure that, because that's a lot of questions that came, well, what about shortage? Why aren't you showing shortage in your plan? Well, now we are. And every time we update it, it's going to be whatever the current research says is the probability of shortages to M&I allocations. The recycle program is integral to Tucson Water's continued planning and resource availability. We know reliability. We know that there is the day that our allocation will be shorted from the CAP. More than likely, it won't be shorted once. It'll probably be shorted again, and then again, as climate change, not just drought, begins to take its toll on the Colorado River watershed. So we know that's going to be going away. We want a replacement renewable supply to offset, even after our storage credits are finite. When you pump them all, it's like a bank account. When you write the check for the last dollar, the bank account is empty. So though the stored water is not a renewable supply, it's a finite amount of water. Here are communities that are, what they say, all in when it comes to recycled water use in a potable sense. We're all in, but because we're ready, going to be ready. Orange County, the groundwater replenishment project. Ventura, California, the Water Reuse Association, Santa Clara. Hey, there are a bunch of these California towns. This is Big Springs, Texas, where even on national newspaper, the water director of Big Springs said, this is the only town where you can drink your pee twice. You can drink your beer twice, I'm sorry. So, and that was in the New York Times. It's kind of like, no, it's not what we really want as reusers to have.
Depends on the kind of beer. Right?
Yeah. El Paso, decades and decades of doing treatment, purification, injection, and recovery for the potable supply. The Waco Bolson doesn't have very much groundwater.
You can bring in foreign beer for the embedded water.
True. That's right. We could jack up our recycled volume by importing more beer and having everybody drink it. I think these are extra slides here, but we are open for any questions. In the back.
Yeah, I was just going to ask questions about the population projections because I know that the people that are doing the modeling for transportation for 2045, they have reduced their population projection from the state from 1.8 million to 1.43 million. That's from 40 to 2025. Are you bringing some of your population projections down as well?
We will when that data is final. It's not done. We ask every time we do an update, we would love to have a PAG-TAS report that says this is the population in your service area. It's not ready. It hasn't been ready for 5 years. So those numbers may be looking like that, but they're not official numbers. And they weren't available in 2012. They were not even close.
Well, I'm surprised you say they're not official because they're the ones they're actually using for modeling.
They're modeling.
Transportation improvement plans that are going out today that they're counting.
In 2012, they were not available. There had not been the analysis done. And yeah, So we're not a population projection